Thanks, Peter, and thank you, Latia. Fantastic speech. Good morning, Orange. What a pleasure it is to be here at this year's Bush Summit. Now, it's tempting to take this event for granted, given it is now such a fixture on the calendar, but it only started 5 years ago. Then, in July 2019, the bush was on its knees. One of the most brutal droughts in modern history had wreaked havoc across this state. And it was so bad that we at the Daily Telegraph decided it was wholly inadequate to report on this from our urban vantage point. We needed to come to the bush, to listen, to witness, and to be seen to be here. So we dragged the PM, the opposition leader, their state counterparts, ministers, business chiefs, industry heads, just up the road from here to Dubbo. And there, in what was really just an oversized barn, we did listen. We heard directly from farmers forced to wipe out their breeders, write off croplands and foreclose properties that have been in their families for generations. Others, like Terramungamine beef producers Nelson and Susan Carlo, they were holding on for better times. And the Telegraph demanded more than a quick pick-fack with the pollies. As I said on that day, people in our regional areas do not waste a lot of words and are profoundly practical by nature. And it would dishonour them if this summit were to be little more than a talk fest. Hence, the ground rules for this event were established. Now, as then, the Bush Summit brings together the most powerful decision makers in Australia, leaders in politics, business and the community, and it puts them in touch with the most important people in Australia, you. It is you, the so-called ordinary people of rural and regional Australia, who are the heart of this nation. Not in some abstract or symbolic sense, or what city dwellers like me might imagine the real Australia to be. You are its true heart, the great beating centre that pumps life into the nation. It is the bush that literally feeds and fuels us, that puts food on our tables and puts lights over our heads. Rural and regional Australia isn't a still and idyllic retreat from urban life. It is the dynamic and vital engine that makes urban life possible. And yet, too often the bush is an afterthought of our urban dwelling politicians, out of sight and out of mind, even as it sustains us. We see this in law and order, the most basic prerequisite for any safe and civilised community. Country cops are undernumbered and overstretched. And you know what? The troublemakers know it. It was once considered that it was the mean city streets that were unsafe to walk at night. These days, many country towns have residents fearing for their safety after dark. Perhaps it's the sheer tyranny of the majority in which smaller communities simply aren't treated with the political respect they deserve. Or perhaps there is a misplaced romanticism in which city dwellers cannot imagine danger or dysfunction in places they fondly remember as a weekend getaway. And this brings us to business and economic development. Rural and regional communities aren't just picture-perfect villages or rolling hills on a postcard, although I must say Orange is looking pretty good today. They are places where people live and work, often for their own betterment, and they need the same job opportunities and resources as the rest of us, often as a means to provide for the rest of us. That tension between the Pollyannas and the pessimist doomsayers is nothing new. It was the subject of an epic series of verse stoushes between two of our greatest bards, Banjo Paterson and Henry Lawson, in the 1890s. Private school educated Paterson is a bit of a toff. He took the heroic, idealistic view of the bush. Lawson, raised in more trying circumstances, had a darker perspective. He was a battler's champion, probably a friend of the Telegraph. I think most pundits actually called it a draw. But that duality has always been there in our minds and in the brutal and random wheel of fortune of our seasons. The wasteland of 2019 stands in stark contrast to the lush hinterlands of today. The Carlos, having weathered the hellstorm, are now riding the upsurge. It's a precarious and fragile existence, however, and too often our city-obsessed political leaders make things so much worse. Many of you would be familiar with the current controversy over Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek and her decision to block the $1 billion McPhillamys gold mine because of the objections of a dissident Indigenous group. Thus, no doubt, with the best of intentions, an immense and potentially life-changing economic opportunity for the region has been lost because a piece of land has been too precious to sustain those who actually live on it. Indeed, it was only days earlier that Prime Minister Albanese ironically declared the government's #1 priority in Indigenous affairs was to provide economic opportunities for First Nations people. And yet here, one such enormous opportunity has just been denied. But we still hold out a candle of hope that perhaps we can change Tanya's mind. Because while you will hear a lot of wise words at this summit, and we hope that they are listened to by those who matter, ultimately, this summit is not about talking, it's about doing. It is action, not words, that we need if we are to survive the challenges and seize the opportunities that are ahead of us. Challenges that are real and profound, but opportunities that are potentially limitless if we embrace them. The people of the bush are perfectly placed to be at the vanguard of Australia's next phase of economic growth. They are smart, skilled and resilient, and routinely overcome obstacles that would stop most of us. So consider the words you hear at this summit to be a call to arms in the fight for our prosperity and a future that strengthens and benefits us all, no matter where we live in this great white land. Thank you.